Hello and welcome to Roompact's ResEdChat podcast, where we highlight cool people who do cool things in college student housing and residence life. I'm your host, Crystal Lay. I use the she, her series pronouns, and I'm excited to connect with you today. So, I was reading an article in the Akuoi Talking Stick a couple of weeks ago, and I absolutely loved everything I read. And as I went back up to look at who wrote that article, I thought, I know this amazing human. I wonder if they will hop on and talk about this article. So today we're going to get into traditions that we have in housing. We're going to talk about this idea of pushing through. And just all the things that are happening in our departments and ways that we can be more intentional as we think about well-being and success for our students and our staff. And who better to do this than our guests that we have? I'll stop rambling and have our guests introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Lay. I appreciate you. I appreciate Roompact podcast platform. I am Demarcus Merritt, senior, father, husband, just all around housing guy. I'm currently assistant director at George Mason University. Also the chair for mid-level leadership institute with a cool one of my and the president of Wakuho. So just a couple of things out there. Try to get my feet wet in the leadership realm, but I'm so excited about this platform today and look forward to talking more about the topic at hand.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's get started with this first question. So in the article, you talked about you believe that we're starting to normalize burnout. And so what was the moment, Demarcus, that made you realize that maybe this is just what we do now? Maybe we're burnt out all the time.
Yeah, it really sat with me for reflections. I think I'm in a very good season right now in a very supportive environment. Love my supervisor, Derek McReynolds, and he's always challenging me about, how I'm not putting my taking on too much too soon, especially regardless of how much of a seasoned veteran he feels like I am in the field. But we got to talking about like moving and movement operations and those kind of things. And it actually came from a place of peace. Here at George Mason, I really enjoyed our moving process. I'm like, okay, you look around, you see all the cars, the bins, there's so much stuff going on. You're like, this feels good though. Like the weather is cooperating, it's not too hot, the rain, everything is great. And I'm like, but why am I having trouble accepting this? Like, why am
Mm.
I having trouble accepting this reality? And I really sat down, I went home, and I was talking with my wife Ashley, and was just like, she's like, hey babe, how was moving? And I'm like, actually it was really good. Like things were smooth, things were organized, families were nice, people had great attitudes. But it really sat with me that there's been some past experiences that have not felt so good. And we came across what a mentor once shared with me long ago of sometimes what we want the mind, what we try to force the mind to forget, the body remembers. And I realized that sometimes my body would get so tense and tight in late July, August, but I'm like, moving is smooth, moving is cool. Like, why am I feeling like it's hurting? Why I feel like I'm in physical pain? And I was talking to some higher, what I call higher ed homies, and we were talking, and we said, he's like, well, Demarcus, you had a tough move in a couple years ago, or 3 years ago, you were down four staff, and you were at work from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And I was like, man, I forgot about that. Like, but so my body was sending warning signs saying, hey, you've been normalizing pushing through so much that now this reality of a smooth move in, a smooth operation, it seems foreign to you, right? So it made me just question and dig a little deeper. And then I started talking to different colleagues and saying, hey, how's your moving experience? And that's what they were sharing. I was like, man, just moving it's just something we get through. And I'm like, well, why is that? Why is that? Is there something we can do? Is it something we can change, even if it's a small modification? What are some things we can do that maybe change that attitude or that force and that some of it to fall push through that I feel like we've normalized so much?
So this push through idea, I'm assuming that's like you just get through it, right? Or just keep going. We know this happens, just a couple more days, right? And I remember watching this movie a couple of years ago where the person kept saying just one more, right? And just pushing through. And so how do you think that phrase or that idea has shaped our profession, and has it shaped it for the better or for the worse, in your opinion?
Yeah, great question. I think I'll start for the better. I think we are a resilient field. We we teach resilience, we model it, right? And it's through these things because we know, like, we call it the training train. Like once pro staff training starts, and then we get the grads and we pick up the RAs and then we move. So
Mhm.
it is there's a beauty to that, right? However, at the same time, kind of in the same boat, the other truth that we have to hold, and sometimes I feel like we ignore, there's a resilience that we say we celebrate it so much that I had to sit back and start saying, well, what if we didn't put ourselves in positions that we had to be resilient? What if I got to just be? What if I got to be human? What if I got to be, I didn't have to go to this extra space, find this extra force within myself to get through and to push through. What does that look like, right? And start toggling with, well, how could training look different? Because what I also realized, Crystal, was in some operations, some departments, training and moving are led by two different people, two different
Mm.
departments. And sometimes those units are not talking. And so if I got a big ask from the moving committee and then I got a big ask from the training committee, I'm the one that's pinched between the truths, right? Pinched between the ask. And so how do we start to have more centered conversation? But in centering those conversations, how do we center the humans? Because a lot of it, sometimes I feel like moving is Disneyland, right? Moving is how do we prepare the hotel for our guests? How do we prepare this home away from home? But in order for me to prepare home the best, I also got to figure out what do I need? What do I need on the other side of August? So I started with me. I started to position myself in June. And I know some of the younger professionals I've talked to, they feel like I'm like the old guy on the porch. Like, what are you talking about? Like, why are you thinking about September in June? I'm like, I'm thinking from a self-care standpoint, what do I need on the other side of August that now I may not take that last minute trip, that buffer week between pro staff training and RA. I may not fly to Barbados because like I like Aruba and I want to get away and put my sand in the put my toes in the sand. But what is that going to cost me when I come back and reintegration into the work, right? In the midst of this some of the fall push. So I think there's a beauty that yes, we are resilient. We are a resilient organization, a resilient profession. But I question, do we always need to position ourselves to be resilient if there's other ways we can rethink some things? And then I started reflecting on strategies that I've seen in other institutions. Colleagues were telling me things that they made shifts and those things. I'm like, oh, okay, here are some other ways that people are rethinking this thing, but we're having such siloed conversation about it. The larger thing is everybody's tired in August, right? Everybody's like, don't call me till after Labor Day is what I typically tell my family. Like, I'm not available until after Labor Day. How do I change that? And how do I change it in a healthy way? And that's the heart of it, Crystal, is I really want us to think it's not about shame. It's not a shame game. It's really about how do we rethink this for the health and heart of our organization?
So this pushing through, and also even resilience now, because resilience is, I think it's like bouncing back from a struggle, right? Like, should we celebrate being resilient all the time? How often are we resilient? Like, I feel like there should be like hash marks, like, okay, I've been resilient 5 times this year. I'm done being resilient. How do we how do we change? And I like how you talked about the move-in pieces. At my campus, we have a campus-wide committee. First time we're doing this, and so it's different campus partners with housing building out what move-in is going to look like. Because I was like, hey, we are welcoming students to campus. We are doing this, right? It can't just be housing. Move-in is a heavy lift. So I like that example, but you're also being real of like August we do push through, right? And so I just talked about the celebration of like resiliency. Are there other things that we celebrate in housing that you think maybe we shouldn't?
Ooh, how much time we got? I think one of the things that we celebrate, and this is something that, and I'll tell my story. One of the things I problematically celebrated was I used to save PTO like they were Chuck E. Cheese coins. I don't. I
Mm,
think I thought I was getting a perfect attendance award at the end of the year or something. Nobody does that, right? There's not certificates. There's no LinkedIn learning badge for like missing no days off work, and where that is a credible feat in some professions. Like, I don't want my doctor taking that many days off, right? However, in this field, I had to shift that mindset that I can't take any days off, right? And not because, yes, PTO, prepare to others. I have that time saved up. It's earned leave, it's accrued, it is there. But I was not allowing myself to access. And I really had to get back to a position where I was giving myself permission to be away, permission to be off. And that came from having a supportive environment, from a supervisor that leaned in from a compassionate lens to say, hey, at the top of my one-on-one was and his name was Ron Winger. He was at the University of Florida. He asked, after he said, "How are you?" His next two questions was, "When's the last time you took off? When's the last time you were off? And when's the next time you're off?" And it helped him keep track of who was out of his office on his team, but it was also positioning us to say, "Hey, this vacation, your time away, your self-care is not only important to you, it's important to me." And so that helped change not only me as a professional, but in how I model the leadership of taking that time off. Because I think we applaud when somebody, oh, I haven't taken time off in 3 years. Like I remember I had a colleague at a university once, and I think they had like 600 hours leave saved or something. Like they were losing hundreds of hours each year, and it was like the person was just like, I love what I do, and I just don't feel like I can step away. And it's like, well, is that sustainable? And then what models are we setting up for the future generation? Because Gen Z is like, nah, we not. I'm gonna take
Mm-hmm.
my time. I'm gonna take my time. Like, actually, I'm probably gonna owe you a day or two because I'm gonna make sure I take my time, right? But how do we do that in a way? So that was something I really had to, and something I'm a strong advocate for. Of hey, even with my colleagues and they're my peer leadership team, hey man, like you just came out of room selection. You were doing all these processes. What can I step in for you so you can get a couple of days off? You can take a half a day off. And how are we asking those questions and how we advocate for people before that ask comes? Because some people are so exhausted, they don't even have the language or the capacity to communicate. Hey, I'm tired. I'm tapped. And so how do we do that to lean in on each other and to lean on one another to be able to say, hey, I got you. You can step away and normalize that too, right? Normalize that it's okay to step away because I've been in certain environments where I've seen leadership like, oh, I can't leave. I can't take off, right? And it's not until you become sick. And that was one of my wake up stories, probably in 2013 when I ended up in the hospital for a week. Doctors couldn't explain anything. I couldn't move my neck, couldn't drink water, couldn't do anything, couldn't eat, which that's really why I knew something was wrong. It's because I couldn't eat anything. That was my indicator. Like, okay, I need to go to the hospital. Um, but Crystal, the doctor said something very profound to me that, and I'm a very spiritual man, so I was rooted and grounded. Like, God, what is going on? But something I was able to stomach a couple of applesauce on my fifth day in the hospital. And me and my little nurse buddy, we were celebrating, like, okay, you got something down. And the doctor came in and we were floored. They was like, we have no clue what is going on with you and why your vitals are starting to climb. And he said something that still sticks with to this day. He said, all I can say, and this is not a medicated evaluation, you needed critical rest. He said, you didn't just find out where your wall was, you probably crashed through it. And he said, your body set you down. And from that day, even just from the experience of the hospital and not being able to eat and those kind of things, I've tried to reposition how I look at rest versus how I look at recovery. And in the same conversation, how do we make room for rest at the start of the conversation and not at the end of everything that we have to do?
Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that story. I think our bodies will tell us, right? That headache, sitting in the chair, your back ache, and how do we listen to ourselves? And, there are physiological symptoms or even an attitude, right? Like I noticed I've been short with folks this week, and it's only Monday. Right. Like there's things that you start to note about your body and you have to listen to it. And so this celebration of being here all the time, or like you said, the attendance award, which was coveted in K through 12, right? And you get this piece of paper, you get this star. It's not like that in the workplace. And so, how do we make sure we're caring for ourselves? I think another reason why folks sometimes don't take that paid time off is because some campuses you get a payout. Now, here's the deal. I wonder if it's, that I'm veering us down a different road. So I'm gonna steer us back, but just go here with me. That preparation for wherever I move to next, I'm going to need some money. I'm going to need a down payment. So that payout, right? I'm going to sacrifice my wellness so I can have a little bit of money to be able to get to my next venture, because we know there's some pay stuff out here happening, right? So just more of an assumption. I haven't, done a poll or anything, but I wonder how much are we sacrificing out of survival now and planning how we're going to survive later doing this work. So you mentioned in your response to Marcus, you talked about a supervisor you had. And so how can supervisors better recognize when staff are struggling, even when they're performing well? Because you could be doing well, but also doing bad, right?
Yes.
So what can supervisors do?
Yeah, I think and we're at a very unique position in like so much has happened, especially since COVID, right? I think we are relearning ourselves. COVID stripped back a lot. It made us look at the work we do differently. It made us look at humanity different. I know for me, it definitely made me more grateful for humanity and how am I humanizing people behind the work and behind the process, right? And so I think as a supervisor and the great supervisors I've had and the one how some of the characteristics I try to emulate with teams that I've been entrusted with is yes, you have that high achiever, right? But how humanizing is your one-on-one in spaces that you hold together, right? Is it there was a point, and like again, only my narrative, there was a point my supervision was based on here's what I need from you. Here's what I need. Here's the deadline. Here's the task. Here's this. And that was at the big, that was before they could get in their chair and sit across the desk from me. This is what I have so many asks, follow
Mm,
up questions, da da da. And then somebody challenged me one time. It's like, well, what if you flip it, right? They was like, well, how do you find out how the staff member is? And I'm like, well, I typically ask them like when I'm walking them out of my office or whatever the case may be. It's like, well, what if you flip it? What if you flip the script? And flip the script
mm,
is start with the how are you first, right?
mm,
Because
mm,
then that if you humanize the person, the professional will come out, right? And so I think that's how we can kind of look and pay attention to tells from those high performing professionals that may not be doing okay, may have skipped out on the PTO, may have taken on all the tasks. They continually put their hand up, they continually say yes. And I was told long ago, um, you know, how many times are you saying yes to everything else and you're saying no to you? Right. And how do we
mm,
start to flip that? And how do I empower my team to say, it's okay, I got you? And I think we just got to lean in, right? One of the things that I think is a practice that I try that is not perfection, that truly is a practice, is how do I infuse compassion into my leadership? Even when I may not be fond of the staff members, right? Or
mhm,
the
mhm.
staff member, I'm waiting on this year and last year transition report from a staff member, right? But how do I still humanize that person that's in front of me or humanize that person on my team and saying, hey, something else is going on here? Or are you overperforming and overachieving because you are trying to distract yourself that you got some health things going on or that
Mm,
you need to pay attention to X, Y, Z? I noticed that you are great on this committee, but every time I ask you, how are you? Or you seem tired, or that's your fourth cup of coffee today. And I'm not judging, but you also told me you don't drink coffee like that. So how are we paying attention to the tells? How are we paying attention to what's not being said and how things are being done? And I also think we bring into the conversation of a psychological safety, right? And that is different per staff member, per environment, per day. Like, right. And I want to say when I'm meeting with staff, whether it's a conversation in our office or whether it's on a cool place on campus that they like, because that's why I try to switch it up times. Like, well, let's meet in a place that one of your favorite places on campus.
mm,
Is that space psychologically safe? Because I can say, Dr. Lay, how are you doing today? And you can give me the performing answer. I'm good, right? And it might not be me. It might be because my office or the space we're meeting
mm,
in is not conducive and for me to bear myself, for me to be vulnerable with you
mhm,
and say, hey, I'm actually not doing well, right? I just came off a mental health breakdown in November, and I couldn't explain it because I didn't have the language for it. I just felt heaviness in my chest. I honestly, at one point, talked to my wife. Was like, I don't know if I'm. Like if it's a stress, is this a heart attack? I know like the threats that exist around and when it comes to health about Black men. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be silent about this. I don't want to be this loud advocate on Facebook and LinkedIn. And then I'm the one that's suffering in silence. And so I did go to the doctor. I did for the first time secure a therapist to talk at like, hey, what is going on inside of me? And so I think I was able to tend to myself first. And so I think tending to myself also empowers me to say, hey, I'm leaning in more to the narrative of my staff and my team and saying, hey, is everything going on? And I think one of the things I appreciate about you is you will ask how someone's going on, but one of the things you do to go the extra mile is you hold space. We don't often hold the space to receive the response when somebody says, actually, I'm not doing okay. Because sometimes I'll be guilty. Somebody I say, hey, how you doing? I've already heard their response before they open their mouth. Oh, I'm good. And I'm steady moving, right? How many times did I miss somebody feeling flush in their face or their body language changes or they look like shoulders heavy and like that I can say, oh, you actually not okay. Come on, let's go walk and talk. Let's how do I just hold space? Even if you don't have the words for it, we're gonna sit in silence right here. We're cool. And so how do we do that? Some of it is space and grace, because I think in the business of student affairs, we have not always treated the people with priority. And so I think we sometimes we get into this checkbook mentality of like, I got this staff and this staff and that staff, and that's human. Like it does happen. But how are we stopping that kind of checkbox, that routine is to lean in to folks and say, hey, how are you really doing? And holding the space to hear and receive what they have to share.
Thank you, Demarcus. I'm hearing having compassion, not just for others, but also for yourself. I'm hearing again this theme about listening to your body and also naming where you're at. You're like you told your wife like, hey, something feels off, right? You talked about, reaching out for therapy. It's hard for helpers to ask for help. And so, what a beautiful testament of the importance of saying, I need this too, right? Because you want to be your best self. You also talked about identity pieces, right? There are different things that you're navigating, because of your identity. And so, what does allyship look like, right? And I think the other piece you talked about is folks are holding things that we may not know anything about. And sometimes work might be their safe place. We talk about, PTO. Maybe sometimes people work so much because that's the safe place and home is not a safe place. Like there's all these things. And so you never know that unless you take a moment to really engage with that person, within appropriate boundaries, right? And I'm like, we're referral agents, right? I'm not a counselor. But how do you pay attention and notice and name so folks feel like they matter? We're not a transactional field. And I hope we never go so far off into that area where it feels like we are replaceable. And I know sometimes folks feel that way. And so how do we get back to the heart of our work, right? So now you talked about supervisors, you talked about other colleagues and professional staff. I'm wondering about your student staff. Are there things that your student staff or students that you're around, they've been teaching you about wellness that maybe you weren't seeing as a professional staff member?
Yeah. One thing I will applaud this and the upcoming generation is that I feel like most of them, even if they don't know what wellness is, they are holding a space to question what this looks like. I didn't know that working until 10 o'clock at night on a Friday was what I shouldn't have been doing, right?
Mm.
Because I thought I was just trying to be the best professional. Nobody sat me down. That wasn't in a manual saying you need to be in your office till 10. I thought like this is what I need to do to go the extra mile. And I think they've been able to really question and help the global and local humanity say, wellness is it needs to be embedded into what we do, who we are. And so I appreciate that, whereas we talk about boundaries and boundary setting differently and generationally, they are having the conversation. hey, here's what my boundary, here's what the impact is, here's how I'm being impacted. And I think I've been able to take that and learn from them and sit with them, whether it's at a program or whether it's in common, meeting one of our students at a coffee shop, and we're just talking about catching up on life, and then saying, hey, I had to also reach out to my therapist, or I access these resources on campus. I think a lot about our student leaders, right? Especially in the resident advisor, resident assistant role, who uh, one of the things we've shifted in our training is before we start talking about what kind of resource they can be to others, we talk about what kind of resource they be to themselves. And that is
Mm.
a part of what we call a care day. And our care day is basically an academic and talks about caring, it talks about advocacy, but all of that regards self. What are the resources on campus that are available to you as a student and student leader? Before we start talking about door decks, before we start talking about what's your programming slate for this year and how you're going to meet requirements, how are you doing and how are you going to do this role? What are you going to need before you need it, right? And how do we help them that? They've been very vocal. I mean, they are very vocal at times, but I applaud that because I think they have a voice now that I did not have as a student and as a young professional, particularly to question some things. And I think sometimes we meet questioning of practices and protocol as like, oh, well, you're challenging my experience and my expertise. And it's like sometimes it is like, hey, have you thought about, right? Why do we do this, right? And I am very much from the old school framework of because I said so. Right, because like so, but they've taught me how to look at things and also to think about when we're designing processes and spaces, as much as we are thinking about who is contributing to the conversation, how we also think about who's not in the room. I think holistically our as individual as some stereotypes are out there about our students these days, I think I've met some wonderful student leaders who have challenged that stereotype and say, no, I think about the people who are not here. I'm going to advocate for the people who are not in the room just as much as I advocate for the people who are in the room. So trying to take those into practice has been really, really eye-opening for me and really grounding because, you know, as I stay longer in the field, I feel far further and further away from that freshman class. And I'm like, okay, what are y'all on? Pokemon, go jump up, down. I don't know what it is these days, but they help find that connection, right? And I do think they've really pushed the conversation of wellness almost as not optional. We have to take about this. There's research out there about how this generation, particularly Gen Z, really cares about them understanding transparency and clarity and the context around something, but they also value psychological safety. They value being in a place of wellness where they working at, right? And it's and whereas I think when I was a young professional, I accepted that they were two phenomena and they were two separate things. Like if I want to be well, I go to the doctor and I go to the gym. I never thought about wellness at work. And I think
Mm.
they shifted that conversation in a way that's necessary, especially for the sustainability of the profession and the sustainability of higher ed in general.
Now, the wellness has been the thread throughout our conversation. And your article going back, the anchor, everything was tied to move in. And it sounds like we have an opportunity to not only create space for folks to care for themselves throughout the year so they're not so tired or pushing through when we get to move in. But also, we have an opportunity to share these pieces with students when they arrive on our campus, right? And so I feel like there's this like wealth of knowledge. It's like, why would we keep it to ourselves, right? Like, how do we start to influence this generation of students that's coming to our campus? Because they stay the same age we get older, right? Every year, we have these 17, 18, 19-year-olds coming to our campus. So with the wellness pieces in mind, like if you could redesign move in from scratch and you could take it from the how we're involved as pro staff, how we've set up for it, or anything that comes to mind, what would you do differently, Demarcus?
I think one of the things that I've seen in successful practice that I would do differently from like a design thinking standpoint is to have more conversation, mutual conversation and planning spaces between moving decision makers and training decision makers. And that's just one caveat. I think one of the most impressive things I've seen and that I'll continue to advocate for at every institution I've been at, was a colleague when she made adjustments. When I was in North Carolina, she made adjustments to our training schedule because every year we started to see uh, our students that are particularly people were having what I call that church night in training. Like you just go tap them on the shoulder, like, you okay? And go get some water and come back, right? Get yourself back together, right? But I started to sit with students, and you say learning from students. I'm sitting with students like, hey man, what's going on? Like, you got, he's like, man, it's just a lot. Like, we're in training until 5, 6 p.m. And then we got door decks and we got those things. And so my colleague, one of the things she led like a three-pronged approach, and one of them was, how do we simplify processes? And so
Mm.
not everybody, not but all budgets are created equally, but we had a budget at that point that we actually worked with a vendor to produce door decks. To take that back, it gave us back 3 to 4 hours in training because students were saying they were staying up to 2, 3 a.m. doing door decks
Mm-hmm.
because it's a passion point, it's a connection point for them between them and the residents. And some of them, they was like, well, why did y'all do that? We really love doing door decks. I'm like, you can do all the extra door decks you want. But it also helped us from an inclusivity point because now every hall, everybody has the same door deck engagement, same door deck. And also the caveat that that vendor also sent us extra. So when somebody room changed, that door deck travel with them. So now when I'm walking on the hall, I'm not the odd person out with no door deck. I have my door deck in hand, or my RA has already secured it from the community, and it matches the theme of everybody else. Now I've those who were really passionate, our door deck protesters, they we gave them an opportunity to say, hey, you can still do your door deck, you can still be creative. They end up turning their first door deck into a party. And now it was a great way because I remember my RA came and said, hey, Demarcus, I know I was one of the ones who was kind of giving y'all pushback, but I really appreciate it because A, I get an extra program out of the way. But some of the names that were on my roster were not the honored names of my residents, right? And they hadn't had that conversation with their parents yet, right? And so now they were able to take that identity and honor their true identity in that door deck by creating a custom door deck with that RA. And they said that creates such a respect bond because it's say, hey, you didn't just guess, you invited me in. But also scaling training. I think scaling training because I call it the kitchen sink cookie effect, right? Everybody goes to Panera, you get that, it got everything in it. I probably eat stuff that I'm allergic to. I just don't know because there's so much stuff in there, right? But that Panera cookie is good to us until it's not, right? And so we when you talk about scaling training, there's so many things that I will say that we are well intended. We want to make sure our staff are prepared. We want to make sure they have as little questions as possible before the residents arrive. We want to make sure they know all the ins and outs of their job. But if we're having a full out hour and a half duty conversation in August, but somebody's not on call till October, are they really retaining that information? Are they going to be to apply that? Whereas if we scale it down, talk about the kind of nuts and bolts of crisis management, care management, but then have a continual development session in September, October, especially if we have data that says, though that honeymoon is over, crisis starts to creep and rise. If we're able to be more responsive with that type of scalable training, we saw 100% difference with our staff. In 1 year, our staff looked like zombies on training day, like they were on moving day. It's
Mm.
ours, you don't want that for the human, but you also what you ever go to somebody's house and they sleepy? You like, you knew I was coming. Like, are you not prepared for me?
Right,
Like, I
right.
feel some
Yeah.
type of way. I feel like I should go back. Let's try again. Right. The next year, when we scale trying to cut it off at 4, we were very specific what they should and should not be doing after 5, and told them, say, hey, these things that we've taken away, we've actually scaled them out for professional development, and here's why, here's what that looks like. I had so many high fives on that move in because RAs were like, I've never felt like this. Oh my gosh, I feel like I have so much energy. And I was like, well, can you do this? And it was just, it just felt like the energy and spirit was so much higher. And so that really sat with me of like, huh, we made these small modifications and it has this big impact. So if I've had this big impact with our student staff, that's going to trickle down to this welcome home is now a big impact. And then how they got introduced to the campus is now a big impact. And so you start looking at all other things, right? And what are other things that we can modify? What are other things that we can partner better with students to say, how do we deliver this? How do we unpack this? How do we modify this? How do we sustain this? And start to really figure out what are those processes that are sustainable and what are those things that we're doing out of comfort or tradition.
So in our day-to-day work, Demarcus, we're here for student success. And in our conversation, I'm hearing you say that we need to be just as intentional about staff well-being as we are about student success, because there is a trickle down. That's that's what I'm taking away from this.
Yes, I tell people all the time. For the first half of my career, yes, I am here for the students. Always will be. But something shifted in me, and because it doesn't come from a place of deficiency, it comes from a place of development and fulfillment. I've seen how people poured in me. I've seen how supervisors care. But then I've talked to colleagues who do not have similar or parallel experiences, and it's like, wait, oh, so this is not common? Oh, so these are unicorn experiences? Why are we not talking about this? Right? Why are we not talking about the how, like the how, and how can we redesign our thinking? And so, yes, I am very much always a pro and vocal advocate about reprioritizing professionals in the business of student affairs. Because as we both know, and I think we've shared this at one point in time in our leadership journey together, of not only you cannot pour from an empty cup, you should not.
Mm,
I don't want the bottom of an empty cup, right? And so
mm,
how we continue to replenish and repair and refuel our professional staff, because if I only come to you with ask, but I never ask you how are you refilling your cup, right? That goes back to that conversation you asked me before of me looking through that high performer and saying, wait a minute, I've asked you to do this, this, and this. No, you haven't taken off because I haven't made space for you to take off. Right. And so I also have to be mindful of my ask and conscious of my ask as well. But we have to, and I think that is where we partner better together of with our aspiring professionals, with our students, with our student staff, with ourselves of saying, all right, how do we center wellness? Because I think again, I thought it was two different conversations when I was coming up in the profession in my early years of no, wellness is the outside after five thing, not wellness at work. I don't, it sounds like such a foreign concept, but how do we make this a new culture, a new design of how are we taking care of people? And I'll be honest, Crystal, especially when you talked about bringing in identity, I want to celebrate somebody being 40 years in the field. I
mm,
do not want to mourn somebody who I missed their health issues and now I have to celebrate their life because
mm.
now they succumb to health issues because the field or conditions were not conducive for them to have a healthy lifestyle, right? It's like we can't take life or humanity for granted. Like it's we don't have as many people spending 40 years in the field anymore, right? So you don't have that long-term latitude leader that's like, oh yeah, I've been doing this since 1900s, right? It's crazy to think about when you say that out loud. But so, um, but I just want us to be healthier. I want the field to be healthier. I want us to be more holistic because I want to look back with my sons, Demarcus Jr. and Isaiah, and when they think about higher education, and they say, Daddy, was it like this when you were younger, right? When you were in a professional? And I want to say, no, son, it's better. Not it's the same. No, ooh, I recognize that. Ooh, yeah, they used to do that when I was in the heyday too. Like that's not a bragging point. We should be better. And I think because I've also linked with my studies of the high turnover rate and the high burnout is also linked to the lack of retention and wellness that's there because people are individually trying to figure this out. And either this field is going to be healthy for us or it's not. Right. And I want to be an ambassador of healthy practices and what we now well-being does not mean we will not do hard things. It does not mean we will not make hard decisions. That we make hard decisions because we're dealing and supporting real life people in the process. But how are we doing it? How are we taking care of one another, taking care of ourselves while we're making these hard decisions? I think it has to be an increasingly more important and more common conversation.
Thank you so much. That that's that's really powerful. And how do we care for each other? How do we care for ourselves and then the future generations? And you're talking about looking at your boys, right? And legacy, right? Um, so in addition to your article, which I'm going to add to the show notes, are there other resources that you would recommend for folks who want to learn more about what you talked about today?
At this time, I have a couple of other things that I'm working on right now when it comes to wellness. I am currently reading Simon Sinek's book on the Golden Circle. And right now, just working on recentering my why, but I'm recentering my why with wellness in mind. And so, what does that look like? So, I invite people if you want to go on that journey, I would love to have conversation and dialogue. Look for a conference near you. But yeah, that's one of the things I'm working on right now. But I invite any conversation. I want to learn from other like how are people centering wellness in their work and how are they creating that life to work harmony because I think if we can lean in and learn more from each other it can be more of a best practice of a better practice.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Better practice, right? Because we say best practice, it might not be better practice. I'm writing this down. I'm gonna have some Demarcus bumper stickers with all these amazing sayings. So thank you so much, Demarcus, for everything that you've shared today. You've given me so much to think about, and I'm so grateful. And I know folks will definitely take away some really good stuff from listening to this. All right. And I want to thank everyone for spending time with us today. If you have an idea for a guest or a topic that you would like to have here, please reach out to us at Roompact. Take care.